This is Chapter 12, Part B on the central nervous system. So we said that the adult brain has four major regions. So the cerebral hemispheres make up the outside surface of the brain, the diencephalon, shown here in purple, the brain stem, here in green, consisting of the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla, and then the cerebellum, and the bottommost dorsal region of the brain. So last section we talked about the cerebral hemispheres. So this section, Part B, will focus on these remaining brain regions. So starting with the diencephalon, this purple structure here. So it consists of three structures considered the thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus. So the thalamus is the larger kind of central portion, the hypothalamus here, and then the epithalamus is this little small light purple region just on the posterior side. So all three of these structures are going to enclose this third ventricle, or this fluid-filled space. So the thalamus, again, makes up about 80% or the majority of the diencephalon. So its main function, though, is to act as kind of a relay station for all of this incoming information from the cortex, so that outer portion of the conscious brain. So it's going to help to sort, edit, and relay all of this input. So it gets impulses from regions like the hypothalamus, so it helps to regulate some of your emotions, some of your hormones, your digestive function, impulses from the cerebellum and other regions of the brain to help with your motor activities, as well as impulses for memory or sensory integration. So again, overall, it acts just to kind of mediate all of this incoming sensation, outgoing motor activities, cortical arousal, learning, and memory. The hypothalamus is located just below the thalamus. So an important region of the hypothalamus is the infundibulum. So this infundibulum is this little stalk that's going to connect the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland. So they have this direct connection where they can communicate with one another. So this is important later on when we look at autonomic function and things like the endocrine system. So the hypothalamus is our main visceral control, so kind of your digestive control, your autonomic functions, and regulating centers to maintain homeostasis. So things like blood pressure, heart rate, digestive activity, pupil size, all of these kind of autonomic functions can be regulated by the hypothalamus. So it can also help regulate body temperature. So the hypothalamus is kind of the thermostat of the body. So it can also send those signals for sweating or shivering. Also helps to regulate hunger in response to different blood levels of hormones. So it helps to monitor and regulate those digestive hormones. Regulates water balance and thirst. So the thirst center in the brain is in the hypothalamus when your body needs more water. It also helps regulate the sleep and wake cycles. One of its primary roles is in controlling the endocrine system. So we'll talk about the endocrine system in 2114 next semester, but it helps to regulate secretions of this anterior pituitary gland as well as produce some posterior pituitary hormones itself. The epithalamus is this most dorsal portion in the diencephalon. So it contains the pineal gland or the pineal body. So it just extends or kind of sticks out from the back of the diencephalon region. But the main role of the pineal gland and the epithalamus is the secretion of melatonin. So melatonin is a hormone or neurotransmitter that helps regulate the sleep-wake cycle. So you can also buy this over the counter as a sleep aid, and it is effective in most people. So the brain stem, the region shown in green, consists of the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla. So This is considered kind of like your lizard brain. So it controls your autonomic behaviors that are necessary for survival. So this region of the brain, your most primitive part of the brain, is primarily concerned with keeping you alive, keeping your vital body systems functioning. So the midbrain, shown here in the green, is going to play a role in that pain suppression and the fight or flight response. Right? So it's going to allow you to try to survive. So you can um, ignore the pain until you're out of the danger, kind of that shock response. The pons is located just between the midbrain and the medulla. It's also going to serve as a point of origin for several of the cranial nerves that we'll talk about in the next chapter. But one of its main roles is helping to maintain the normal rhythm of breathing. So those respiratory centers act with this pons region. The medulla oblongata, sometimes just called the medulla, is going to kind of merge with the spinal cord at the foramen magnum. So where it leaves the brain or leaves the skull and becomes the spinal cord. So it's going to contain that fourth ventricle, that fluid-filled ventricle. It also contains the choroid plexus. So this is an important structure because it contains the capillaries and the fluid necessary to form the cerebral spinal fluid. That CSF fluid that fills the ventricles and the cavities in the brain is going to be manufactured and synthesized at these little capillary membranes. So some functions of the medulla oblongata, again, just part of that lizard brain, just kind of keeping you alive and your body functioning. It's your autonomic reflex center. So we said the hypothalamus is kind of the main control center of autonomic or basic body functions. So there will be some overlap with the hypothalamus and the medulla oblongata. So some different functional groups of the medulla that it's kind of in charge of. We have the cardiovascular center, so it can adjust the heart rate or the force of contraction, so how hard the heart is squeezing blood out, as well as vasomotor center, so we can adjust blood vessel diameter, so we can constrict or relax the blood vessels to help regulate blood pressure. The respiratory centers of the medulla help to generate your breathing rhythm. So we normally breathe at kind of that tidal volume, that resting pace. So this helps just to control our rate and depth of breathing, along with some input from that pons. Some other centers regulated by the medulla include the vomiting center. So medulla is pretty much the only region in the central nervous system or in the brain that does not have the blood-brain barrier. So it basically kind of monitors the chemical composition of the blood at all times for any toxins or poison. So if it detects something, it'll trigger that vomiting reflex. Hiccuping, swallowing, coughing, sneezing. So all of these are kind of involuntary autonomic behaviors. The cerebellum makes up about 11% of the brain mass, so it's this most dorsal posterior lobe. So it's going to process input from different regions to help coordinate our movement. So we have smooth, coordinated movements. We don't have jerky type movements. So input from the cortex, so from your conscious brain, the brain stem, so again, part of that that lizard brain, your primitive brain, as well as your sensory receptors, so things like your visual receptors, your touch, your balance. So using all of this information, this incoming information from different regions of the brain and the body, it helps to kind of come up with a blueprint for how to carry out specific movements. So looking at a cross-section structure of the cerebellum, see kind of this unique tree-like branching pattern. So this is a thin layer of gray matter, right, with this white matter tree branching pattern. So this is called the arbor vitae. So arbor is in like Arbor Day, so it's tree, and vitae is vital, so the vital tree. So it's just going to help transfer the sensory and motor information either to and from the other regions of the cerebellum. So again, looking at how cerebellar processing helps to fine-tune our motor activity. So we said it's going to receive impulse from pretty much multiple sources. So the cerebral cortex, when we have the intent to initiate a movement. So our brain tells our muscles, we want to move this muscle, as well as proprioceptors or stretch receptors of the muscles. So the cerebellum is always aware of the body's position in space and its momentum. Uh, so it can also help calculate the best way, the best plan of action to smoothly coordinate these muscle contractions. And then essentially sends the blueprint that it came up with using its information to tell the motor cortex of the brain how to carry out this action. So again, showing your incoming information from vestibular, so our sense of balance, visual, so what we see with our eyes around us, proprioceptors, the stretch receptors in your muscles, right? And then it's ultimately going to send its blueprint out to that primary and premotor areas.